that it's not possible to stand here in Israel, in Jerusalem, at the Kraft Stadium, and not to begin by remembering how much Myra loved Israel. And there are so many stories about Myra and Israel, but my favorite one is one that her son Dan told about 10 months ago, right here in this place. He told the assembled crowd that his mother, on her many, many trips to Israel, used to schlep back these enormous cans, jerry cans, full of Israeli olive oil. And at home, he said, they used to make fun of her. They used to diss her. They said, "Mom, you live in Boston. 10 minutes from your house are stores that sell the most exclusive imported olive oil from Italy." And he said that Myra would turn on them, and she would say, "You listen to me. That Italian olive oil is Drek. And the only good olive oil is olive oil that you bring from Israel." And I think that Myra didn't only love Israel. You know, there are a lot of people who love Israel. Beyond her love for Israel, she really had a longing for Israel. And whenever I would meet her in New York, after she would hug me and kiss me and inquire about my family, the next thing she would say always was, "I'm coming in May. Robert and I are bringing a group over in such and such a month. I've arranged my trip for this and this time." She was always thinking and planning when her next trip to Israel was going to be. And it's reminiscent for me of what the great Jewish poet and philosopher Rav Yehuda Halevi said. He said, "Ani b'ma'arav v'libi b'mizrach." I am in the West, but my heart is in the East. And that was Myra. Her heart was always here with us. And yet she was a very proud American. She loved to be American. She was extremely proud of the things that she did in America, whether it was the Boys and Girls Clubs of Boston, whether it was what she did through Combined Jewish Philanthropies, the Boston Foundation, Hillel Brandeis. She was exceedingly proud. And perhaps the most American thing about Myra was her love for the penultimate American sport of football, which she came to very late in life. She once confided in my husband that she never liked football and she didn't understand it until the family actually bought the team, in which case she fell in love with it. She also confided in my husband that she would become physically ill anytime the team would play the Jets. And I think that for Myra, very much the marriage of the quintessentially American sport of football with this country that she loved, and to be able to see young Israeli men and women throwing around the American football brought her great, great joy. And I'm really happy to introduce to you the person who made that all happen, the father of American football in Israel. Maybe I should say the mother, because you birthed this sport here. Steve.
Well, thank you all for being our guests at Kraft Family Stadium. Just so you know about this facility, a couple of words. In 1999, together with Teddy Kollek, we dedicated the facility. At the beginning, it was with natural grass. We knew that that wasn't going to work. Eventually, in 2005, we put in turf. That's the Kraft family, which has invested about $1 million in creating the facility that you see before you today. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that during the course of my remarks. When we first heard about I went to visit Boston about 10 days before Myra passed. Every year I go and have an annual business meeting in July with Robert in Foxborough, and when I got there, I realized that the meeting may or may not take place. And Robert insisted that I come to his house rather than wait for him in the office, because he had stopped all of his business, everything in his business, except for one thing, and that is he was holding secret negotiations, NFL negotiations with the players and the owners in his house because of Myra's condition. Myra was, at that time, already very ill. And I went to the house. It was several days before Myra passed, and I was actually there when an ambulance arrived bringing Myra home, basically for home hospice in the house. we finished my business in Israel and landed here and received the news of Myra passing. And two of us decided that we were not going to stay here and decided to go back to Boston and attend the Shiva at the Kraft family home. But in the meantime, the same night that we heard about Myra's passing, spontaneously, a lot of the ladies that you see out here and men that you see out here came to Kraft Stadium that night. We had an impromptu ceremony of ourselves because all of us were very much in mourning in a very personal way. The football community in Israel received the news of the passing of Myra Kraft with great sadness. These are the remarks that I made at that ceremony. During the past 12 years, Myra gave her love and support to the many thousands of people in Jerusalem and elsewhere in Israel who have been able to enjoy Kraft Family Stadium. Myra nurtured and adopted the Israeli women's football program, and we are well aware that without her willing assistance, the WAFI, which is the League of Women, would have been hard-pressed to reach its current level of success. Every time she visited Israel, Myra made it her business to visit Kraft Stadium and showed personal affection for so many of our athletes. Myra was a great lover of Israel and supporter of numerous Jewish causes. So many people in Israel and in Jewish communities in distress around the world have benefited from her generous philanthropy. But to us at Kraft Family Stadium, she was a family member. She was loved and gave love in return. She'll be mourned for a long time, and she'll be remembered forever. I'll give you just one example that I didn't know about. Jonathan, one of the players on the men's national team, came over to me and he said, "I've been brought up a certain way in my house, and I've only been kissed by 3 women. I've only been kissed by 3 women in my life. 2 of them were relatives, and 1 of them was Myra Kraft." Because that's the kind of respect and feeling that all of us had for her. She would arrive here from various events that she had with prime ministers and everyone in the country, and then she would come here. It could be in the middle of a rainstorm, and she would come even in high heels and run out onto the field. She'd take her baseball cap and turn it on backwards and go out and throw the ball together with our women. A word about the women. She fell in love with our women's team. From the time that she heard the story about their creation, even before we built the field in 1999, she said to me, "You have to make sure that women get a role in the field, in playing at the field." What she didn't know is that some years later, she knew as it began to happen, they would become one of the best football teams of flag football in the world. Today, they're ranked number 2 in Europe, and a couple of days from now, they're going to a big tournament in Germany, and then they're heading off to the World Championship, which will be taking place in Sweden. Our men's team will also be going to that World Championship, I hope. Myra adopted the women financially and in every other way. We're always looking for help for our men's team. They're a great team of players. They're looking to place, I would say, in the top 5 at the World Championship. They're good enough to do that if they're given an opportunity. Our women, we're hoping, will be in the top 3 on the podium, bringing home a medal to the state of Israel. They were so good that last month they were invited by the Minister of Sport to a special honors dinner in Tel Aviv, which was meant only for the medal winners of the state of Israel. And we were essentially the only team in any sport in Israel that came home with a medal last year. Others were all individual athletes. You know, we've been doing very well in Europe and so on, but those are individual athletes. This is a team. This is a team that, believe it or not, is made up almost entirely, if not entirely, by women who are Shomrei Shabbat. They keep the Sabbath. Our men's and women's team will not play games on Saturday because so many of our players are observant. They take glad kosher food with them, and the men carry with them a Sefer Torah so that they can also daven on Shabbat. This is a handicap for us because instead of playing our games over a 3-day period, all of our games are squeezed into either Friday or Sunday without any games on Saturday. And yet we're achieving great results. What our league and our facility has grown here with the help of Myra Kraft, and with this I'll conclude, is beyond all expectations of us. Some years ago, it was just a dream of a couple of friends, a few friends of mine, to be able to play football. That was about 22 years ago. And we started a league, and it grew to 6 teams, to 8 teams. That league has now grown to more than 50 teams of men, 15 teams of women, 15 high school teams. And we've also recently, 5 years ago, created a tackle football program, which maybe you've heard about because it gets quite a lot of publicity in the States. We have 10 tackle football teams in Israel of adults, and now we have 10 tackle football teams in high schools. And we're not talking about Jerusalem Americans. We're talking about Hebrew in the huddle, with teams from Nahariya in the north down to Beersheba in the south. It's coming out of the grassroots. We're not even creating the teams are creating themselves and then coming to us to help organize them. I've spoken with the Kraft family at length, of course, about the success of this facility in helping to make all of that happen. Robert is now committed to a second facility, at least, which will be called the Myra Kraft Memorial Field. It'll probably be built in Tel Aviv or in the Tel Aviv area, and that will be the beginning of what we hope will be a series of facilities like this that are devoted to the sport of football. Like the tennis centers exist around the country, we hope to have football centers around the country. The Kraft family is extremely generous to us, but their donation is only a very small percentage of what we raise in total. We have 90 different individuals, mostly from the United States, Jewish and Christian, who help us simply because they love football, they love sport, and they love what we've been doing here in Israel of giving 2,000 a total of 2,000 football players today, giving them the love of the sport, and we hope that in years to come that'll grow even more. Finally, I'd like to say this. Myra Kraft is up there. She's looking at us. She's looking down on us. She was the type of a person whose spirit will always be there with us. I know that our women, a year after her death, are going proudly with MHK on their chests, as did the Patriots. They'll remember her always. Her devotion to Israel, really to humanity, is something that all of us will take with us as we all will try to be better people, because she was the type of person that is just an inspiration to us here in this small place in Israel. And whenever she would come through those gates, she would run over to me, and we would hug, and she would say, when I come here, when I come to Israel, I'm visiting. When I come to this specific place, I feel like I'm at home. That's how we felt, and I hope that that's how you feel when you visit our facility. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve. Myra was a very, very unique person. She was uncomfortable with any kind of honor. She disliked pomp. She had zero tolerance for anything that she perceived was insincere or phony. She was incapable of finessing people. She was not a schmoozer. And you might imagine that these were some of the qualities that didn't always make her the easiest chair to work with. But these were precisely the qualities that made her a very, very unique and extraordinary human being. And like most people, she was drawn to people who were like her. She respected and admired those who spoke what was in their heart and their head, and who were not afraid to speak up, and who were not seeking prestige. And therefore, it comes as no surprise to anybody here that one of the JDC board members that she was close to and really, really admired was our own very special Elizabeth Barrett.
How many of you actually knew Myra Kraft? Oh my God, that's so fantastic. Then I hope that you felt the way I did about her. I admired her and was terribly fond of her. She was on the rescue committee with me, and you know she was chair of Israel, and she was a JDC person, and she loved the JDC. I wanted to tell you a little something about her because although I knew her, there was a lot I didn't know about her. So I called some of her friends her other friends, and among other people I called were Marshall Weinberg, Jane Weitzman, Carol Savitz, and they spoke to many people about Myra. Besides the fact that you may not know, she was born in 1942, and when she died in July of 2011, it was very untimely. She was 68 years old. I personally feel the loss. And they lived outside of Brookline, were very involved in the Boston community, in the Boys and Girls Club. She was personally extremely involved and incredibly generous. The foundation. I agree with you. She had no room for pretension. She didn't have an ounce of pretension herself, and all she cared about was just being down to earth, doing good, and her family. And she loved her husband and her 4 children, her grandchildren. She loved the whole family. At the memorial service, which I was not at, but Marshall told me, at the memorial service, when her husband received a plaque in her honor, he broke down and cried. And he adored her. She had a heart of gold. That's what you've all been saying, and it's so true. And she would just sit down and write a check, unexpectedly, without request. She saw through problems, and she wouldn't just want to spend the money, she would want to put herself into it, and if she saw a problem, she was going to fix it. My kind of woman. I love her. I just want to tell you one more story. Very interesting. The Patriots, which she loved, and she loved this team. She loved the people on this team, the women's team especially, she felt very close to and was very proud of. But she loved the Patriots, and she worked with the Patriots' wives. She did not mince words. That's one of the reasons I admired her so much. And once, she didn't interfere with the team so much, except once when her husband hired a Nebraskan defensive tackle who had a history of violence with women. She asked him to reconsider. No, she actually demanded that he reconsider. And it was the only time that a first draft has been waived before training camp. And that is something that I don't know if all of us would have the guts to say or do, and I admire both of them for doing that. I'm going to miss Myra. I miss her very much. I care deeply for her, and I thank you for the opportunity to remember her here.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. As Elizabeth mentioned, Myra has 4 sons, of whom she was extremely and justifiably proud. The last time that I saw Myra alive, she had a photo that it was taken from what I believe was probably the last family vacation they ever took together. They took the entire family on a boat, and they rented a boat, and she had this beautiful photograph of her 4 sons together with her and with Robert, and they were all looking tan and fit and happy. And when she would look at the picture, when she showed me the picture, she was so happy. I think she even had tears in her eyes. And Myra used to refer to these sons as the boys, which I totally relate to because I have 3 boys, and I also call them the boys, like en masse. Are the boys coming home? Are the boys hungry? Are the boys, as if they move together in one single mass. And Myra always spoke about the boys, but she also very often mentioned the girls, which sometimes could refer to the daughters-in-law, whom she respected and admired, but often, when preceded by the word my, often referred to the championship Israeli women's flag football team and their indomitable leader, their quarterback, Shana Sprung.
Hey everyone. First of all, I'd like to welcome you guys to Kraft Family Stadium. A lot of people here spoke about Myra. They spoke about everything we do on this field. I'm here to speak about our women's program, a little bit of history. From my perspective, Steve spoke about what went on when Myra pushed him to find a group of girls that wanted to come out and play. I was one of those first girls who came out, sitting literally here on these steps, watching my brother, watching my friends play a game that I always loved watching on TV. I always played, in the basement with my brothers. And Steve Leibowitz came over to us, and he basically asked us if we wanted to play. So initially when he first said that, I didn't 100% believe him. He even spoke about a tournament in the Dominican Republic that was happening that year in 2004, and he asked us if we wanted to come. So first thing I did was say 100% yes. I made a few phone calls. We gathered a group of girls together. He brought out our coach, who is still our coach, Yona Mishan, and that was the beginning of a women's national team in Israel. So that was the first team in 2004, and we started WAFI, which is the Women's American Football in Israel League. That started out as 4 teams, and this year, I'm proud to say, we have about 15 teams. So we've, tripled the amount of teams. Besides that, our national team has traveled to over 15 international tournaments. Like Steve said, this week we'll be going to Germany. That'll be at least 16th or 17th. Besides that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the girls. The girls you see here, this is not our entire team. A lot of people have jobs. Some girls are married. We have one girl who's even married to one of the men who play on Big Blue, which is a tackle team in the IFL. We have girls who have played and are not coaching. We have majority of the girls are religious observant, as Steve was saying. And I've spoken to every single girl, specifically about Myra, and everyone's expressed, obviously, our gratitude to her before she passed away. I'll describe the first time I met Myra, walking in this field. The field is not as pretty as this. It was rainy, it was muddy, and she was wearing a gorgeous coat and these really nice heels, and we were, throwing around full of mud, and we were running over to meet her at the front, and she said, no, just stop, I'm coming to you. And that to me is exactly everything about Myra. That's just what she represented, and as an individual, I could say for myself, she is 100% my role model. The way she treats her children, her family, any person she meets, that's who I want to be. That's how I want to raise my children. On a personal level, I just want to talk about this past February, Patriots made it to the Super Bowl, and I was fortunate enough to be one of the people who came from here and obviously watch the game, but also be a part of the Kraft family. They invited me, they welcomed me literally as one of their own, and that is something I will never ever forget, obviously. Another thing I'd like to mention is on that trip, I came back with those MHK pins, which that year when she passed away, we didn't know exactly what the Patriots were going to be wearing, so we made our own variation, which is a heart with Myra in it. Every girl here is wearing that. And last night we had a team barbecue just right before we are setting off to Germany on Thursday, and I gave every single girl an MHK pin that I brought back from in February, and the main thing for me was everyone just look at Myra, think about everything she represented. The people who knew her, obviously, it could be easier, but I always made a promise to Robert and his entire family that every single girl, and we have some younger girls, 16-year-olds that have just joined the team, I vow to make sure that every single girl here knows who Myra Kraft is, not just the name, but the person that she represents. And if you guys, whoever, I see none of you all are in gym clothing, but we'd like to have a little bit of a clinic and teach you guys a little bit more about football and flag football, and I'm sure you'll explain to that. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Shauna. In January of 2010, Myra led a board mission to Israel. And as Ron Grossman can certainly attest, it's a lot of hard work to lead a board mission to Israel. And Myra worked very hard. She had to greet all the dignitaries. She had to exchange presents with all the politicians. She had to work the bus every single day. She had to listen to and take in all the constructive criticism and respond from the participants. She was working very hard. But the moment that Myra got off the bus at a site visit, and the very moment that a young Ethiopian girl from Pact would run up to her and bring her a bouquet of flowers, or when she was listening intently to a disabled individual explaining about how they're seeking to get more independence in their life through the Center for Independent Living. Or when she was in Hula and the young Arab youth were showing her how they made their community better through their own volunteer activities, then Myra was not working. You could visibly see that all the tension would drain out of her body. Her smile would go ear to ear. She was comfortable, she was in her element, and she was very happy. I remember a specific incident from that mission. We broke up into a very, very small group. We took a very small group into a one-bedroom, not very nice smelling apartment of a woman who was mentally disabled, who was participating in the Supportive Communities Project. And the woman started to speak and tell her whole life story, and it was going on quite long, and I was thinking to myself, oh no, this is terrible. How are we going to get out of here? How are we going to make an elegant exit? We have to be on time. What are we going to do? And I looked over at Myra to see if she was thinking the same thing, and she was not. She absolutely was not. She was listening very intently to the translation of this woman's life story, and she was nodding her head in sympathy, and she was just exuding kindness. And when I think about that aspect of Myra, it hits me very strongly how badly we've distorted the definition of the word philanthropist, which we use mostly to mean somebody who gives a lot of money. But Myra was a philanthropist in the literal sense of the word, because she loved people. Not the famous people, not the important people, the people. And she wasn't in love with the idea of helping people or with the satisfaction that it brought. And she didn't love the challenge of developing models that have system-wide impact. She loved the people. She just loved the people. And you know what? You can't fake that. It's not possible. So Myra, I just want to say, you felt with your heart and you led with your heart. You should know that the people who loved you miss you every single day, and the people who don't simply didn't know you. And in every sense of the word, you are an American, Israeli, Jewish patriot. Yehi zichrech baruch.
I just wanted to say that Myra totally loved these women, and I had the pleasure of being here in 1999 for the dedication with Robert and Myra of this place. And the only thing I wanted to add is that for those of us who love Myra, it's hard to be here without her. It's hard to be in Israel without her. It's hard to be every day doing the work that we do without her. And so the only thing that I want to say is during the Shloshim at Robert's house, we were talking about how much we love Myra. And he asked me, he said, do you think she knew? And I think that the one thing that we can all be assured of, as much as Myra loved the Jewish people, and she loved all the Jewish people, she personified, find yourself a teacher, find yourself a friend, from Pirkei Avot. That was Myra. All of you are testament to the fact that Myra, I believe, knew how much people loved her. And the one thing that I can say in everybody's grief and missing Myra is that Myra is everywhere, especially here. I see her everywhere, and every time that anybody from the JDC does another good deed, you'll be making sure that her eternal light lives on forever and ever.
I was lucky enough to have been on that last trip that Myra took the board. You know, it's a funny thing. I knew Myra. I knew her from the board. We had sat in committees together. We had sat in board meetings together. But you never really know somebody till you take a mission. And that was such a great experience for me. My greatest sadness was when I heard she was ill and I knew she wasn't going to survive, that I wouldn't have another opportunity to really be with her. Because just as everyone said, she was the most dedicated, the most sincere, and the most down-to-earth person I have ever met. Here was a woman who had everything and could have sat back and just rested on her laurels. She had already done a great deal. She had already been very active in her organization in Boston and in various aspects there. She didn't have to do what she did. She did it because she loved Israel, because she loved JDC, and as as has been said, she loved people. So I hope that from every experience that you have with JDC and every board mission that you take, you meet a new friend from our board that gives you insight and respect for their dedication and the work that they do. Thank you.